Good morning to lecture number 5 of the Atlas Exchanging Knowledge lecture series. Today with Dr. Joanna Cloy and Mathew Freeman from the UK on health and well-being, safe by design and avoiding harmful chemicals. I'll give you a bit of context before we dive right into the topic, and I can't wait to hear more about it. This lecture series was initiated and is managed by Professor Graham Brooker, who unfortunately can't be with us today. But he's the head of interior design at the RCA in London. And myself, I'm Miriam Dreyer. I'm the Atlas researcher for the Atlas Archive and organizing these lectures. And of course, the ECIA. And for those of you who don't know what the ECIA is, it's the European Council of Interior Architects who's hosting this format and for which we are working and we are here today. So the ECIA is the institution that represents interior architects and designers all across Europe. It holds 18 member states at the moment, which hold and represent thousands of interior architects and designers all across Europe. And many of you are here today, so welcome. I think we have quite a few from France today, so welcome, France. We've got quite a few from Norway too, and from Ireland as well, which is great. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining in. So I'll tell you a bit more about the project. Essentially, the ECIA has been awarded an EU grant for a project that is called the BCSP, and it stands for Building on Connections for a Stronger Profession. And this is really what we'd like to do. And the Atlas Archive and Atlas Lecture Series is the sub-project of this BCSP project, and therefore also EU funded. And essentially, with the project, we'd like to promote the rich and diverse expertise that we can find in the field of interior architecture and design across Europe, and to talk to each other about the rich and wonderful work that we do and the impact that we can have with it. So one part, as I've mentioned earlier, is the Atlas Archive, and who aren't familiar with it yet, the Atlas Archive is a brilliant online repository that is currently being built and is going to be launched for you to access. It is a digital collection of all interior activity across Europe and beyond, and is built up by Field Studio, which are brilliant graphic designers from the UK. And basically, it will be holding a wide range of knowledge all across the interior discipline, starting with theory over materials, perception, sustainability, regulations, software, adaptive reuse, and so on and so forth. And at that also include all different types of media to meet different learning needs, such as books, articles, interior podcasts, films, photography, drawings, videos, and many, many more. And these lectures, the one from today, but also the ones that we've held previously, will also be uploaded onto the Atlas Archive, so you will also be able to access them through there. Or if you go on YouTube and you check out ECIA, Atlas Exchanging Knowledge Lectures, then you'll also be able to find this one and the previous ones there too. So if you've missed the last ones, then go check it out. And we're happy to see so many different countries represented every time, so welcome. And last but not least, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our speakers today. Dr. Joanna Cloy and Mathew Freeman from the UK. Dr. Joanna Cloy is a senior project manager at the environmental charity FIDRA. She is an experienced environmental scientist and is keen to help find solutions for tackling chemical and plastic pollution. She has a PhD in environmental geochemistry and joined FIDRA after 16 years of working as a soil researcher. She currently leads FIDRA's sustainable fire safety project that seeks to reduce the use of harmful chemical flame retardants in furniture. And we can't wait to hear more about your work in a second. Mathew Freeman is the founder and director of Freeman Studio, a British Institute of Interior Design registered interior designer and former president of the BIID. Mathew Studio focuses on sustainable, circular, and regenerative interior design Thank you for being here with us today. It's a very big honor to share this space with you and hear more about your expertise and your knowledge. So I'd say, Matthew, the stage is yours.
Cool. Thank you very much. Welcome. Today, Joanna will share some of her research on crucial aspects of daily life, a subject that I prioritise and promote in my interior design practice, which is health and well-being. These are essential to all life on Earth, influencing the air we breathe, the water we consume, and the food we eat. So while we must consume to survive, we must do so in a balanced way that respects all life on our planet. Since the mid-1800s, human activity has dramatically altered the Earth, and as a result, nearly every person now carries micro and nanoplastics in their body and is exposed to over 10,000 forever chemicals, which are harmful and have adverse effects on all living beings. The scale of the climate crisis and levels of pollution can leave you feeling overwhelmed. So how can we actively contribute to a solution? As interior designers and interior architects, we have a responsibility to design, specify, and detail our work in a way that helps create a world where future generations can thrive. So Joanna and I met back in the summer of 2023 at an industry event roundtable discussing chemical flame retardants in mattresses, and our paths have crossed many times since. I'm always impressed by her knowledge, passion, and I'm grateful for her time today. So thank you very much for joining us, Joanna. If you would like to add anything further and then begin your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Matt. I'll just share my screen and do my presentation. So hopefully everybody can see slides there. Okay, great. Okay, so as Miriam and Matt said, I work for an environmental charity called FIDRA. We're a very small charity based in Scotland. And today I'm going to talk all about how you can prioritise your health and well-being and that of your clients when it comes to interior design. But I am an environmental scientist, so I'm going to be focusing on telling you about harmful chemicals that you might not be aware of that we find in outdoor as well as indoor environments. I'll talk about chemical flame retardants, but I'll also talk about these forever chemicals, PFAS, and some other nasties that we've been working on as a charity. So just to start, like I said, we're a small Scottish charity, and we are all about trying to shine a light on chemical and plastic pollution. We work collaboratively with a whole range of different stakeholders, and we like to influence positive environmental change. So our focus is the environment, but of course, at the same time, we also promote healthier, sustainable societies and support human health protection from chemicals. And we work with a lot of other charities that are trying to reduce exposure of people to harmful chemicals, for example. So the projects that I lead are the chemical flame retardants project that we have, and also a lovely sewage-free soils project that's all about sewage sludge. So I'll tell you a little bit more in a bit. But just to start, as Matt put the context there about pollution and how we can feel quite overwhelmed by the pollution crisis that we have. And this figure here shows like the planetary boundaries, and that really indicates the safe limits for human pressure on like processes which maintain a healthy planet. So the health of our planet isn't great. We know that there's some world leaders that aren't even really acknowledging the harm that we're doing to our planet. And I guess the worrying thing is that this pollution that we've created over the years leads to 1 in 6 deaths, mainly I suppose the main culprit is air pollution. But the pollution that I'm focusing on today is the harmful persistent chemicals that we find in our environments. So I won't bore you with a lot of horrible chemical information. I'll try and break it down in terms of what it is about these chemicals that we use in everyday life, and we've become reliant on them in many ways. So what is it that's problematic? So harmful chemicals, synthetic chemicals, are usually persistent in the environment, so they don't break down easily. They're bioaccumulative, so that means that they can actually become concentrated through food chains and bioaccumulate or bioconcentrate. So our bodies can become a place where these chemicals accumulate. And there's been measurements of chemicals in like blood, breast milk, fatty tissues. And yeah, it's quite shocking to think about how these chemicals end up everywhere, even pristine environments like Antarctica. And it's the toxicity of the chemicals which is particularly worrying. So there can be toxic effects due to exposure to chemicals. And the mobility as well, because they're persistent, they can be transported to faraway places, for example, through atmospheric deposition. They can be deposited in regions of the world that you would expect to be completely pristine. So yes, it's a depressing story, but we can do something about it and make a change, which I'll come on to towards the end of this talk. And if we start with our food systems before moving on to indoor environments, if we consider all the chemical inputs that go into our environment through activities such as agriculture. Like I mentioned, I have a project that focuses on sewage sludge. And in many countries across Europe and states in America, there are actually bans on the use of sewage sludge as a fertilizer, because of the knowledge of nasty contaminants that aren't being removed. Well, they're impossible to remove, for example. And I do know that Norway has recently commissioned some work through the Food Safety Authority to understand more about the environmental and human health impacts of using contaminated materials like sewage sludge. So many countries have put restrictions in place. Unfortunately, the UK still sees the use of sewage sludge on land as the best thing for a circular economy. So we have all these issues around striving for a circular economy and reusing resources, but we can't forget like the chemicals that are locked into these products. There's also a project that we run that's all about the forever chemicals, PFAS, and the fact that they are contained within pesticides. And we know that pesticides themselves can be very harmful to the environment, but we do rely on them for food production. But we try to stop the unnecessary use of PFAS and microplastics within some of these like necessary processes for feeding the world. So just to again kind of summarize this cycle of how contaminants in sewage sludge kind of end up in our food and in our bodies from the food that we consume. And it's all down to the products that we use. So anything that we flush down our toilets, like microfibers from our clothing that ends up in the wastewaters from our washing machines. And I do believe France have done some really great things with making sure all new washing machines have filters on them now, so that microfibers aren't getting into those wastewater systems. So we really need to do more in terms of upstream solutions to stop contaminating resources. So I'll now focus on like how humans get exposed. So I've already mentioned like the food systems, but humans are exposed to synthetic chemicals through lots of different processes. So we can inhale contaminated dust, ingest contaminated dust. We can absorb chemicals through our skin from like sitting on some furniture, for example, that has chemicals that are migrating out of the fabrics and the materials. And it's the vulnerable groups like babies and toddlers that crawl around on the floor. They've got the hand to mouth behavior, so they become exposed to some of these nasty chemicals in our environment. But what are the impacts? Well, there's been a lot of studies that have linked some of these synthetic chemicals with health impacts such as impairment to neurological function, reproductive development. Many chemicals are found to be carcinogenic, and yes, they're banned or restricted, but unfortunately when these persistent chemicals are in our homes, it's difficult to eliminate them from our houses, and especially when it's long-lived products that are a source of chemicals. So there's also endocrine disrupting chemicals that disrupt hormone function, and we rely on hormone function, healthy hormone function, for our growth and development. So yes, there's a lot of really depressing research out there, but I'll try to focus on some positives and what we need to do to tackle this awful problem of chemical exposure that often gets overlooked. So if we focus on indoor environments, there are some well-known examples which, you know, are widely being tackled still to this day. So for example, the use of heavy metals like lead and arsenic in paint. These heavy metals, we know about their harm to human and environmental health. So of course, they're very strongly regulated now. And it was believed by scientists that Napoleon had died because of exposure to arsenic from the paint or the wallpaper in the room where he was exiled. But now it's known that it was stomach cancer that had killed him. But it's always interesting to hear some of these kind of bits of research where, when we find out how harmful a chemical is, trying to link back human exposure and causes of death to these things. Asbestos is another nasty material, a fiber that causes human harm. So there's a lot of building materials that are having to get taken out of buildings, old buildings, to remove and remediate the asbestos problem. But if we think about nowadays, there are these overlooked examples, and that's why this kind of knowledge exchange platform is really important, because as an environmental charity, we want to impart knowledge about chemicals that we're aware of so that we can bring about positive change. And like I said, chemical flame retardants is one of the key things that we're working on. And these chemicals, many of them are these organic, persistent chemicals, some of which have actually been banned now. But they still remain in our long-lived furniture or building materials. So electronics, building insulation, the foam and fabrics in furniture and furnishings can contain harmful chemical flame retardants. And there's current flame retardants in use that, well, they're widely used, and there's studies that are indicating that there's harm, like carcinogenic behavior in some of these chemicals, but they've not been restricted. So we really rely on chemical restriction measures to improve our environments. And I'll come on to that in a bit. Other contaminants of concern include the forever chemicals PFAS, bisphenols, you might have heard of BPA, and also phthalates that are used in plastics. So another like organic chemical that's all around us. Microplastics you'll have heard of. There's microfibers, those microfibers in clothing that end up in the environment. There's the microbeads used in personal care products and cosmetics as well. And luckily in the EU, there is now legislation in place that's going to tackle the intentional use of microplastics in products, which is great to see. And we're hoping that the UK is also going to follow suit. But we do need to remember that there's also unintentional use of things like microplastics. So yeah, it's slowly being tackled over time, but we need more immediate like action by governments to stop our exposure. And this table here just summarizes some of the chemical exposures in household dust. So I've mentioned the phthalates, they'd be found in your vinyl flooring, food packaging, etc. The phenols, like the bisphenols, BPA, found in cleaning products, reusable plastic bottles. I know a lot of plastic bottles now kind of say BPA free, as kind of word spreads and concern spreads through the public. The flame retardants, I've already mentioned some of the sources of flame retardants in our household dust. And again, fragrances like candles, completely innocent seeming products that we buy. And then there's the fluorinated chemicals as well. But I will focus on PFAS towards the end of this talk, so and tell you more. But yeah, there's a table there with the depressing kind of health impacts as well. So if we want to be healthier, we need to try and eliminate these chemicals in our homes. But it is very hard to do that because we need chemical transparency. And unfortunately, in the UK and also Ireland, actually, there's high levels of chemical flame retardants in furniture items. And the reason for that is the strict fire safety regulations that are in place and the flammability testing that domestic products need to pass. And the UK has particularly high chemical flame retardant concentrations in household dust and breast milk, for example. It's really significant, and FIDRA and progressive industries, our contacts like Mathew Freeman, are really trying to fight for a change in regulations to try and improve the quality of our indoor and outdoor environments to protect people and the environment. And if any of you have got black plastic kitchen utensils, unfortunately, many of that black plastic has originated from electronic, like TV sets, for example, that's been recycled and reused. And of course, everyone thinks, oh, that's a great reuse of materials, forgetting about persistent chemicals. So for example, halogenated flame retardants, that's flame retardants that contain elements like bromine and chlorine, for example. A lot of brominated flame retardants have been banned under something called the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. And unfortunately now we're realizing that these banned chemicals have been locked into products. So that's a key reason why we need chemical transparency, because of like the long-lived nature of products, or the production of recycled products with those chemicals in them. And whenever a chemical is like newly restricted, we can't always go back and look to see what products contain because of this lack of transparency. But it's great to see things like the EU Digital Product Passport developments and the eco-design for sustainable products, because our hope is that that will force chemical transparency, especially in a digital, more dynamic way, so that people wouldn't have to go and look at a physical label on a piece of furniture, for example. But having that physical label on a piece of furniture is still better than not having anything at all. So this infographic here just kind of highlights this problem with chemical flame retardants and the barrier to like a safe and effective circular economy. So from when a sofa, for example, is being manufactured, there's the treatment of fabrics and foams with chemicals so that that sofa will pass flammability testing, for example. Those of you in the EU, apart from Ireland, do typically have a much better situation in terms of the flammability requirements. Not for the contract furniture, though that normally does have to pass quite stringent flammability regulations, I believe. So yeah, if you want to try and protect yourselves, it's worth thinking about where you've purchased a piece of furniture and getting in touch with those retailers, manufacturers, to try and find out about the chemicals being used within it as well. And of course, during use of that piece of furniture, that sofa, the chemicals migrate from the materials into the house dust, having an impact on people as well as wildlife, because eventually that dust will go to the outdoor environment. Waste management's a big thing that gets overlooked. People that are trying to process waste, we now in the UK need to incinerate waste sofas because of them containing these banned persistent organic chemicals. So that's having unintended consequences on the environment, because of course incineration leads to emissions of nasty things called dioxins and furans, but also there's a lot of energy required to incinerate the materials. But we do need to destroy the harmful chemicals. And unfortunately, these persistent chemicals, the only way to destroy them is to heat them to high temperatures, like around 800, ideally over 800 degrees C. And then finally, we've got the kind of work by people that want to recycle and reuse an old sofa. But if they don't have that knowledge about chemical content, it kind of puts them in a difficult position. So that's another reason why we really need that chemical transparency. So I think I've made the point about how these harmful synthetic chemicals pose risks to human and environmental health, but also to a sustainable circular future. Key solutions are having extended producer responsibility schemes for furniture, just to promote more sustainable practices, and kind of passing the costs So the polluter pays, and chemical transparency should be part of that. There should be this responsibility where any like suppliers of materials that's used to make a product share information. And we are told by manufacturers and retailers that we work with that they can't actually get that chemical information. So that's where we need governments to really enforce it. We also need to support those progressive manufacturers and retailers, interior designers. We want to help them find the safer alternatives to using nasty chemicals. So what are those alternatives? Things like wool, natural fibers like cotton, and natural latex rather than the synthetic latex are naturally inherently flame retardant materials. If you think of sheep are protected from wildfires due to their wool. And these natural solutions and mimicking nature are something that's key, that we need to do more. But unfortunately, when we want affordable kind of mass-produced furniture, the easiest way of passing flammability regulations is to use these synthetic chemicals. And if you think in the past, before we had these synthetic chemicals in our lives, we would have used natural fibers and horsehair in mattresses, for example. But those fibers aren't great because they decompose when they get wet. Things like polyester and foam are far more like persistent and like long-lived. So better performance, I guess. And then if we think about other kinds of alternatives to things like those brominated chemical flame retardants, some companies are using graphite, expandable graphite, to give a fire barrier, or fiberglass, or even modified bamboo. There's also a good solution that's used in America, where America did change their flammability standards to help improve the design of furniture and remove these unnecessary chemicals. So they use this kind of barrier that encapsulates a foam cushion, for example. So there are design solutions, and that's something that we really want to push to promote. If other countries are doing that, why can't we do that in the UK and Ireland to try and avoid the high use of chemicals? I'll try not to talk too much about the UK because I know that you're not all based in the UK. But we have these really outdated standards, and the use of highly flammable polyurethane foam is problematic. If there's, a match or a cigarette that causes a fire, these highly flammable materials will make a room, go up in flames really quickly. So the argument of chemical industries is that the chemical flame retardants reduce the rate of burning, and they will delay burning so that victims of a house fire can escape. But we really need to promote the more natural alternatives. And we also need to think about whether the use of these chemicals is really necessary. Have these regulations that the UK introduced really saved lives or not? Because there are statistics out there that say that the UK is no safer than other European countries, for example. So it's showing that we're using these chemicals unnecessarily. It's not really achieving what it's set out to do in terms of saving lives. And they are currently being, they're in the process of being updated. And that's really good to see. But people like myself and Matt are really keen for the UK to follow what other European countries are doing, for example, and we need legislation to prioritize our health and the environment's health using the body of scientific evidence that we have. There's so much out there, but it's a case of knowing, you know, what evidence are governments actually going to kind of take on board and notice. And that's where we need action by the public and media to kind of highlight concerns to get change that we need. So we need those quantifiable reductions in the use of chemicals. We really need to push for clear labeling. If the chemicals have to be used, we have the right to know what is in the products that we're purchasing. We don't want to put a burden on consumers, but I feel that there are ways of doing it. For example, like the digital product passports, allowing recyclers to get information they need, allowing interior designers to get the information that they need to make a home less toxic. So we also need a group-based approach to chemical management. So that's where the chemical restrictions come into play. And there's something called EU REACH, and REACH is the regulation, evaluation, and authorization of harmful chemicals. And that basically makes the decisions whether chemicals need to be restricted or banned. And the UK, since leaving the EU, has its own version, but it's lagging behind the EU, so it is really worrying. And there's been some really positive things with EU REACH. For example, brominated aromatic flame retardants are going to be restricted, and they're going to use a group approach. So rather than just banning a single chemical that they know is persistent, toxic, and bioaccumulative, for example, they're going to try and get rid of them as a group. And yes, unfortunately, alternatives may come onto the market to replace those chemicals that get banned, and that's called regrettable substitution, because often the chemicals that are thought to be safer that replace the really nasty ones that have been banned, further down the line, the evidence comes out normally that they're just as harmful. For example, there's chemicals called organophosphates that have been found to be harmful to humans as well. So best thing to do is just to try and go for the natural alternatives and to make that cost effective and supports sustainable design. So yeah, if we can revise regulations and flammability standards and try and make sure that they reflect modern fire safety scenarios. Not as many people are smoking nowadays, for example. We've got good fire alarm systems, there's better fire safety education. We don't need to rely on the chemicals to reduce the rate of burning. We must align and support sustainable product innovation, like the EU Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulations and the digital product passports for sharing information. So I'm now going to move on to these forever chemicals that I've mentioned. So this is the only bit of chemistry that I'm really showing here to indicate that these are a group of manufactured chemicals. There's lots of different types of them. There's over 10,000 PFAS chemicals used in products, and they've got one thing in common. They have this carbon fluorine bond. That's where they get the name per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So if you looked at a product labeling, you could look for the fluoro to kind of indicate whether the product's likely to have PFAS in it. But unfortunately, PFAS isn't always labeled in products. Food packaging, for example, is a key material that exposes people to PFAS. And if you've never heard of PFAS before and it still confuses you, and you want an excuse to watch a film, you could watch the film called Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, because that tells the rather depressing story, but it's really helped raise awareness of PFAS. It tells the story of harmful impacts on human health from the PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, which are now banned. So we need to stop the use of PFAS because there's other PFAS that are going to become banned in the future. So we have these forever chemicals because they provide stain resistance, they provide waterproofing for clothing. There are essential uses in firefighting foams and, well, there are alternatives out there as well, though. So we're actually in the UK trying to make sure that certain PFAS are banned from firefighting foam. But we do appreciate that there's sometimes things called essential uses, but we need to target the unnecessary use of these chemicals. Non-stick frying pans, air fryers are another major source of PFAS, so it's worth looking at labels of products to see whether they say PFAS free. And more retailers are kind of coming on board with this, especially as like America is particularly progressive with the whole PFAS restrictions in drinking water, for example, and sewage sludge, unfortunately, is a major source of PFAS. So we're applying it to our fields for food production in countries where it is allowed. So what are the impacts of PFAS on wildlife and humans? Well, they're very similar. So there's studies that have shown all these kind of impacts on mammals, birds, fish, even bees. But in terms of human health, again, there's all these problems with our immune systems, the endocrine disruptors, so hormone disruption, the increases in cancers, developmental issues, changes to reproductive systems. So yeah, there's an ongoing list of very depressing, horrible impacts. So what can we do to try and limit our exposure? Well, some really great scientists developed a really simple test that makes use of, you know, a drop of something like olive oil on a material. And if that oil forms a bead, like in this picture, it's likely that that product contains PFAS. So we can't say for definite. I mean, this is just a very kind of simple speculative test, but it's been shown that popcorn packaging, for example, the stuff that you put in the microwave, contains PFAS. And if you want to try that out, you can get some oil and try seeing whether the oil soaks in, spreads, or beads on a certain kind of food packaging product that you might have. So that's really helped raise awareness with public. And we do quite a lot of outreach talking to members of public about trying to detect PFAS. So we know that there's lots of different sources of PFAS, and it just makes it really hard to avoid. And like I mentioned, the EU is far more ahead compared to the UK, and they have recently proposed PFAS restrictions, certain PFAS in products they want to restrict. And FIDRA are calling for a ban on all avoidable. So that's, I guess, forgetting about the kind of essential uses at the moment, but the avoidable uses of PFAS in the UK. And we do have a website that can help you try and choose PFAS-free products. So it's worth having a look at resources out there. Also other NGOs as well that are doing similar things with trying to tackle nasty chemicals like PFAS. And finally, the final chemical that I'm going to mention is the bisphenols. It's a chemical that FIDRA used to work on as well. And basically, paper, receipts, again, like plastics and food packaging and stuff contain or used to contain, for sure, these everywhere chemicals, bisphenols, which have been found to disrupt like hormone function. So luckily, a lot of retailers that we and other NGOs have worked with have agreed to take bisphenols out of the receipts paper. So it's to do with the thermal properties of that paper. The bisphenols give that property that's desirable, but of course it's not good. We don't need these chemicals in our receipts, so take them out so that we're not exposed. And more and more manufacturers and retailers are taking steps to avoid bisphenols. So what can you do? Like I mentioned, resources on websites. Learn more about which products are likely to contain chemicals and what the available alternatives are. Of course, cost comes in. That's where we really need to force policy changes to make safe materials and safe by design affordable to all. If you want to know about what chemicals are in products that you're using, write to the manufacturers, the retailers, and then share that knowledge with your networks. But like I said, sometimes the retailers themselves don't even know what chemicals their suppliers have been adding to their furniture, for example. So there's a key actions that you can take. And here's just some resources for further information. But I just want to say that there are mechanisms for finding solutions and having healthier lifestyles. We just need to kind of keep raising awareness of these kind of issues that get overlooked. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop sharing now.
Oh, thank you very much, Joanna. Very insightful. I've been making notes throughout, so I have a few questions and / comments. I suppose it's quite technical, and I think you mentioned depressing a few times.
Yeah, sorry.
Which is the realistic way it should be presented and proposed. So I suppose you had a page about chemical exposure within the home and how that can be picked up in dust. And I think I, at home, have tried to eliminate lots of different things that you had listed in that schedule. And I think it is possible to get away from quite a lot of them. So I think if you can review the products that you use, there's a really good app called Yucca. And if you scan any of your sort of personal care products, any of the foods that you eat, you can scan it and it gives you a rating out of 0 is, I think 0 is terrible, 100 is very good. So if you're putting moisturizer on your skin to protect yourself from the sun, you can scan it and it will tell you exactly what's in there, what chemicals. You could do with exactly.
Is it Yucca?
YUKA. And it's a free to use app. So when I'm in the supermarket, I'm always scanning things. Or you can pay to contribute towards their research, and then you can then search for things if you want to search for moisturizer. But it's a very good app, and it's a very good way to just check what toxins are in things. Again, food, drinks. If you scan alcohol, it won't tell you because it knows you're not supposed to drink alcohol. But energy drinks are amazing. Like the stuff that you see and the levels it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, sometimes ignorance is bliss.
I think that's the thing. Yeah. Especially when you see people drinking massive cans of those energy drinks, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I suppose sticking to drink, I've found a water filter that I'm about to buy. I've done lots of research which filters PFAS out of water. So that's my sort of next purchase. And then I think you were talking about government legislation and that it's important to get the governments to make the changes, which then trickle down through industry, then to, I suppose, designers and consumers. But it also works the bottom up. So today, hopefully, presents interior designers, interior architects with questions to ask of their suppliers. So the more we can interrogate and ask these questions from the bottom up, then suppliers then start questioning how they're making things, and then hopefully change from the top down and bottom up. We can meet somewhere in the middle and make better, bigger changes. And Joanna, I suppose the UK probably, we can say, agree that could do much better. Is there anywhere in the world that is doing very well and we could use as a sort of beacon of hope or aspiration to where we should reach for?
Well, I guess in terms of the chemical flame retardant use in furniture, California and then the rest of US definitely made good changes in terms of the way furniture items were being tested for flammability and you know, use of design solutions like the fire barriers over like flammable cushions, for example, as a way to take out the chemicals. That's really great to see. And we're always talking about the US regulations and saying, you know, the UK needs to either follow the US or follow like the EU's model of using like a less excessive flame, for example, for flammability testing. It is tricky, especially when there's been large numbers of deaths that's happened from fires and incidents, which makes it difficult for governments, of course, but by using the statistics from other countries, especially if those statistics show that the benefits to the environment and human health from avoiding chemicals. And something I didn't mention actually is the smoke toxicity. The chemicals that we add to furniture actually makes the smoke from burning those materials more toxic than if the chemicals weren't added. So I know it's a bit confusing, but there's firefighters that are exposed to really toxic gases, more toxic than if it had been natural materials, for example, without the chemicals.
Yeah, I have, Miriam, I have a video that I can add to the chat or that we can share afterwards that shows a room with natural materials burning and a room with sort of synthetic fossil fuel based chemical, and it's alarming and interesting and very scary. Just to touch back on, I suppose, the California model, they do also label products to say what chemicals are in there. It's, I suppose, on a simpler side, but at least it's on there and it says this product contains XYZ chemicals. So there is that transparency. So as I suppose parents of children or just buying things for your home, you can then be a bit more informed about what you're surrounding yourself by.
Exactly. Like we have it for food, don't we? We know when we buy food, we know what's in it. So why can't we do it for products? Especially
because we do have that information. Yeah, and I suppose having that information, that comes down to sort of O&M manual, so your operations and maintenance manual for your projects as interior designers. You can list everything that's in there, put all of the product information that you have, and just keep that really, really robust so that in the future, if you come to sell items or they're no longer required and they go to be recycled, then at least you've put as much information in there as possible to help the next generation or whoever be able to deal with that waste. I think something I wanted to mention was, I think there's a figure in the UK that 22 million pieces of furniture are sent to landfill every year, which is a mixture of all types of furniture, but that is a phenomenal amount of furniture. And I think, is it 7 million mattresses a year go to landfill, something like that?
Around 7 million. And mattresses are out of scope of the whole, you know, in the UK, the need to incinerate now. So upholstered waste sofas now need to be incinerated because of the banned POPs that they contain. But mattresses were exempt from that. They still go to to landfill. So yeah,
Yeah.
you think of the leaching out into the environment of those chemicals, or the emissions from the incinerators if those sofas aren't being destroyed efficiently enough. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we've created such a big problem.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the areas as well that is quite, it has a resolution in terms of market offering. There are organic mattresses, completely natural, completely CFR free. So that's, I suppose mattresses are a good example of that, because there are options that have chemical fire retardants, there are options that are completely natural.
Yeah.
And then there's varying degrees of, I suppose, ways that you can protect yourself. So if you do have a mattress that you know has chemical fire retardants, we wouldn't say throw it away. You can buy a natural mattress topper, something you can put on top of it, keep using it until you get to that point where you want to swap it further down the line, and then you can go for a natural solution. So there are ways of sort of putting barriers between you and any concerns that you may have.
Yeah, because not everyone can afford those chemical
no,
flame
that is,
retardant mattresses.
Yeah, and that is, I suppose, yes, that's a socioeconomic issue, which is a problem, and yeah, a big discussion point. Earlier, you also mentioned Dark Waters, which is a fantastic / depressing film. There's also Toxic Hot Seat, because you mentioned about firefighters' foam and firefighters' exposure to toxic fumes and toxic smoke. That's based on a series of articles. I think it was the Chicago Tribune. They won a Pulitzer Prize for journalism, and that's where the content for the Toxic Hot Seat comes from, and it's based on that, and it's looking at female firefighters, their exposure during their work, and the fact that their breast milk contains chemicals that they've been exposed to during fires. So that's like the extreme example of how the chemicals can get into the human body. It's, I suppose, everybody else on a lesser scale, but that just is a good example to prove it. And then I did watch Plastic People, which is a new documentary about the exposure of humans and microplastics, nanoplastics, and that everybody basically has probably little bits of plastics in them. And then I did read an article about Mount Everest, and the water samples that were taken at the top of Mount Everest have particles of tire in them. So think of how many cars there are in the world, how many micro parts of tires are released into the air. They're actually on the top of Mount Everest. So that's nothing to do with interior design. That's just a boring fact that I remembered.
If we could design tires that aren't made from rubber and plastic, then we can solve that problem.
Yes. So I think I suppose the BIID, so the British Institute of Interior Design, I chair the Sustainability Committee, and we have produced a Sustainable Specifiers Guide, which is available to download on our website, which is maybe 50 pages long. We're sort of expanding and doing various articles. So within that talks a lot about what you can do as interior designers to help specify in a more sustainable way, looking at circularity, regenerative design, designing for end of life, designing out obsolescence, and then questions that you can ask your suppliers to make sure that you are informed. And then the other thing to do as interior designers is talk to your clients and explain to them why you're making these decisions. And you can be sort of advocates for the future generations and making sure that everyone has healthy, happy lives. Yeah. Did you have any, Miriam, do we have any questions that we might need to answer, or?
Yes, they might be fairly simple questions, and I already expect them not to lead to simple answers, but
okay.
But I know that there's many sustainability labels that brands use to certify products and goods and materials and so on. Is there any labels that you can recommend more than others, let's say, or do you have hints for us on what to look out for?
There's the Ercotex labeling. Matt might know more, but I know that it's not perfect, but it definitely that certification scheme aims to avoid like harmful chemicals or chemicals of high concern.
Yeah, and I suppose I work a lot in residential interior design and looking at GOTS, so Global Organic Textile Standard. So I look at that when I'm trying to find fabrics. So I would say just choose natural and try and choose, depending on whether you're working residential or commercial, but also try and use either one or the other, so a natural or a synthetic. Because if you use a blend of the two, at end of life, it's really hard to separate them, almost impossible. So if you can either keep completely natural, keep completely synthetic, and then at end of life you can do something with it. I suppose looking at B Corp as well. So if you can find like there's a lot of paint companies, a lot of furniture companies that have B Corp, so that will give you an indication that they've gone through rigorous interrogation about their supply chains, how they make their materials, and working practices among a few of the criteria that they look at. So that's a good place to start to try and, I suppose, make us to specify, knowing that they've already gone through those hoops to meet that criteria as well. So yeah, that's a few.
Great, thank you. I think another question that I'd have is, you know, in interior architecture and design, there's usually many components and objects and so on coming together, and it's a very eclectic practice, and you kind of have to choose between different things that then make up an entirety of an interior. And we are given a budget. So my question would be, is there maybe, you've mentioned mattresses or sofas, upholstery, fabrics, is there specific objects or types of furniture that are worth spending more money on and choosing something more sustainable over another? Let's say, for example, I don't know, like not focusing on a cupboard because maybe it's worth spending more money on the mattress or the bed or whatever.
I suppose mattresses, you spend a third of your life on a mattress. So that would always be my primary one to say, if you can't really afford to do many things, then focus on that. So natural mattress, natural bedding, natural bed linens. And then if you've got any upholstered furniture, you can go for natural solutions. But I understand, again, that comes with a price tag. I have been speaking to a few people and are building up a sort of a library of materials where I've got products like a recycled chipboard that uses like an organic glue. So you can actually use and select products that are healthier from the beginning. But I suppose this is part of the education part of it. It's, as designers, maybe choose a project that you've finished, analyze what you used before, and then look for alternatives and have that as a standard thing that you use, like a standard clause or specification. So all your joinery for your wardrobes, all built-in joinery is used in this way by these materials, and then it's almost like a default, and you just put them in. And then there are other things like kitchens. So you can get adhesive-free kitchens. So there's a really good company called Nested Living. They produce kitchens that are sort of regeneratively minded. I went to see their workshop. They're fantastic and really, really passionate and really driving for change. And it's really lovely to see, because they're appearing in different commercial projects, and I just think they're a really good example of what we all should be doing, and hopefully we'll be doing. And I did have a sort of a kitchen costed, and it's not very much different to a sort of entry level, so they can be very flexible in terms of what they can achieve, and with built-in joinery as well. So it's companies like that really sort of driving the way. So it's good to see.
Thank you.
I was going to say paints as well, just off the top of my head. So paints, I suppose paint used to be plastic filled, and now you can get numerous natural paints, and with natural pigments, lime-based paints. I think Graf & Son do one that sequesters carbon. So for the first, I think it's 12 weeks after it's been installed, as it cures, it sequesters carbon. And you have companies like Lincrusta, they produce linseed wall coverings that over time they get harder and harder. So if you use them cleverly, then in areas where you might have more wear and tear, you won't need to replace or even the wall finish, because it will protect the wall finish, and you can just repaint the surface of it. So there's certain products that I think can really, including them, can really make a difference to prolonging the life of the design, which is also sort of what the idea of sustainability is. Design it once, design it better, and it can last as long as possible.
No, thank you. I mean, this is great input and advice, I think, for anyone who is starting to look for more sustainable solutions for the interior and for the planning. And I think this is going to be very, very valuable. Thank you so much for your contribution to the Atlas. And I can't wait to send this live and for people to listen to your advice and to your expertise. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
And yeah, to anyone else, thank you so much for joining in. The Atlas will be launched on April 25th, so you'll be able to watch this session there, or if you look up the lectures on YouTube, you'll also find it there in some time. So thank you everyone for joining in, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank
you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.